Close your eyes for a second and listen. Can you hear it? That sound isn't just a horse galloping. It is the heartbeat of the apocalypse. It is the metallic, hollow clanking of a ghost refusing to die. We all remember that moment during the eclipse. The sky is screaming, the ground is a face of agony, and Casca and Guts are being torn apart by the very things that promise them a dream. Hope is gone. The band of the hawk is meat. And then, tearing through the fabric of reality like a thunderbolt made of calcium and rage, he arrives, the Skull Knight. For years, we cheered him as the ultimate badass, the cavalry that saves the day, the deus ex machina who pulls our broken heroes out of hell. But pause. Stop cheering for a second and look at him. Really look at him. What if I told you that he isn't the hero of this story? What if I told you that the Skull Knight is actually the walking, rattling evidence of the worst tragedy in the history of Berserk? Tonight, we are not just analyzing a cool skeleton on a ghost horse. We are digging into the grave of a man who conquered the world and lost his soul. And we are going to ask the question that changes everything about how you read this masterpiece. What if the Skull Knight is actually the protagonist of Berserk, and Guts is just the echo of his scream? Welcome back, strugglers. Today, we are stepping into the void. We are going to rip the helmet off the mystery and stare into the empty sockets of King Geyserich to understand the true price of ambition. You see, when we read Berserk, we are locked into Guts' perspective. We feel his rage, his confusion. We see the Skull Knight as this cryptic uncle who speaks in riddles and jumps through portals. It is easy to get frustrated with him. You want to grab him and shake him and scream, "Just tell us what is going on." But imagine for a moment that the camera pulls back. Imagine the timeline stretches out not just for 20 years, but for 1,000 years. Suddenly, Guts is not the main character anymore. Guts is the new guy. Guts is the rookie stepping onto a battlefield that has been soaked in blood for a millennium. The Skull Knight has been fighting this war since before the Holy See even existed. And every time he looks at Guts, he isn't seeing a hero. He is looking in a mirror. He is watching a rerun of his own life, terrified that the ending will be the same. Let's go back, way back, before the glint of the Dragon Slayer, before the Golden Age. We need to talk about the legend of King Geyserich. The story tells us of a supreme king who galloped across the continent, conquering nations not because he wanted peace, but because he was possessed by an ambition so fierce it burned the world. He united the warring states into the First Empire, a dark reflection of the chaos we see today. But here is where the educational part of our journey hits you in the gut. We are told Geyserich wore a skull helmet. We are told he was brutal. We are told he imprisoned a sage in the Tower of Conviction, a holy man who preached against the king's sins. And what happened? The sage called down the angels. The capital city was swallowed by the earth in a single night. Does that sound familiar? It should, because that sage is almost certainly Void. The brainy, terrifying leader of the God Hand with the exposed brain was once the Griffith to Geyserich's Guts. This revelation is not just lore trivia, it is the emotional anchor of the entire series. Think about the betrayal Guts felt during the eclipse. Multiply that by an empire. Geyserich didn't just lose a band of mercenaries. He lost a civilization. He lost the woman he loved, the priestess of the cherry blossoms, implied to be the previous user of the Berserker armor, or at least closely tied to the mystical fate of that era. When we see Skull Knight crash the eclipse to save Guts and Casca, he isn't just being a good guy. He is reliving his trauma. He is trying to stop history from rhyming. When he breaks through that dimension, he is screaming at the universe. Not this time. He is the failed protagonist of the previous cycle, the man who reached the end of the game and got the bad ending, now hacking the code to give the new player a fighting chance. But let's talk about the cost. And this is where Berserk stops being a fantasy and starts being a psychological horror story about obsession. We know about the Berserker armor. We watched it chew on Guts, snapping his bones and stitching them back together with steel spikes. It is a nightmare. Now realize this. The Skull Knight died in that armor. Let that sink in. He didn't take it off. He fought until every drop of blood was drained from his body. He fought until his flesh was consumed, until his muscles were dust, until there was nothing left but a soul fused to cold iron. When you hear his voice in the anime, that metallic resonance, that is the sound of a man who literally hollowed himself out for vengeance. He is not a skeleton inside armor. The armor is the body. He is a ghost, haunting his own sword. Why does this matter to us? Why should you care about a dead king? Because the Skull Knight represents the terrifying reality of what happens when you let the struggle consume you completely. We love Guts because he struggles. We admire his resistance. But the Skull Knight is the warning label. He shows us that if you fight monsters for too long, you don't just become a monster. You become a function. You become a mechanism of war. He calls himself an omen of death, and he means it. He has stripped away everything that made him human, his name, his face, his ability to taste food or feel the warmth of the sun, all for the sake of the mission. He is the ultimate sacrifice. He sacrificed himself to destroy the abstract concept of evil. And the tragedy is, he is tired. You can feel it in the way he stands. He is an ancient, weary warrior who has been playing a game of 4D chess against demigods for 1,000 years. And he is losing. Consider his relationship with Void. In the few panels where they interact, the tension is thick enough to choke on. Void acts with this detached cosmic arrogance, talking about causality like it is a law of physics. But Skull Knight, he attacks with personal fury. When he strikes at Void during the eclipse, it is intimate. It is the rage of a man seeing the face of the friend who ruined everything. But notice what happens. Void deflects it. Causality shifts. The Skull Knight fails. Again and again. This is the definition of his hell. He is trapped in a loop where he is powerful enough to survive, but not powerful enough to win. He is the struggler who never gave up, and his reward was an eternity of war. Now, let's layer in another realization that hits hard. The Beharits. We see the Skull Knight eating them. He swallows these eggs of the unseen world. It is grotesque. It looks cool, but think about the symbolism. Beharits are formed from the desires and tears of humanity. They are keys to hell, and he eats them. He consumes the very source of the world's pain. He takes the tools of the enemy and makes them part of himself. He is literally digesting the sins of the world to forge a weapon, the sword of actuation, that can cut through reality itself. This isn't just a power-up. It is a metaphor for how we deal with trauma. We swallow it. We let it sit inside us, hard and cold, hoping that one day we can cough it up as something useful, something that can cut through the lies and pain. But in the meantime, it's just rocks in our belly. The Skull Knight's existence recontextualizes the entire theme of Berserk. We often ask, can Guts have a happy ending? The Skull Knight is the answer to what happens if he doesn't. He is the ghost of Christmas future. He looks at Guts and sees the rage, the berserker armor, the brand, and he knows exactly where this road leads because he paved it. Every piece of advice he gives Guts is laden with this heavy, sorrowful knowledge. When he tells Guts that his sword cannot reach the God Hand, he isn't insulting him. He is stating a fact he learned the hard way. He is saying, I tried. I was stronger than you. I was a king. I had an empire, and I couldn't reach them. So how do you think you can? And yet, he still helps. That is the beautiful, crushing paradox of his character. By all logic, the Skull Knight should have given up centuries ago. He should have faded into the abyss. But he persists. He rides out of the mist to save Luca, to save Guts, to strike at Femto. Why? Because underneath that calcium ribcage, somewhere in the ether that binds his soul to the metal, there is still a spark of humanity. There is still the king who loved his people. There is still the man who loved a woman. He fights not because he thinks he will win, but because he refuses to let the darkness have the final say. He is the embodiment of spite against destiny. As we wrap up this first chapter of our deep dive, I want you to sit with that image. The Skull Knight standing on top of a hill, watching the campfire of Guts's party from a distance. He cannot join them. He cannot eat with them. He cannot share their warmth. He is cut off from the world of the living, forever patrolling the boundaries of hell, so that maybe, just maybe, this one angry swordsman with a missing eye can succeed where he failed. He is the lonely guardian in the dark, but the tragedy of the Skull Knight gets deeper. We haven't even talked about the one person who tethered him to sanity, the one loss that might have hurt more than the kingdom. We need to talk about Flora, and we need to talk about the terrifying possibility that the Skull Knight isn't trying to save the world. He is trying to end it, just to stop the pain. We left off standing at the edge of the abyss, staring at the empty, rattling shell of King Geiserik, the man we know as the Skull Knight, and realizing that his war isn't just a battle. It is a 1,000-year funeral procession. But if we stop there, we miss the heart of the tragedy. To understand why this character breaks my heart every time he steps onto the page, we have to talk about the only warmth he ever knew in the cold void of his existence. We have to talk about Flora. You see, Berserk is brutal, yes. It is filled with blood and guts and demons. But the most painful wounds in this story aren't physical. They are the quiet, lingering aches of lost connections. When Skull Knight arrives at the mansion of the Spirit Tree, just as Griffith's new band of the Hawk is sent to burn it down, we witness a moment that carries the weight of centuries. He doesn't rush in screaming. He doesn't panic. He stands there with the stillness of a grave marker. Flora, the ancient witch, looks at this monstrosity of bone and iron, and she speaks to him not with fear, but with a gentle, teasing familiarity. She calls him old friend, but the subtext screams something deeper, something lost to the ashes of history. She is likely the one who placed the seal on his armor. She is the one who kept his soul from dissipating into the vortex of souls. She has been his anchor. Think about the dynamic here. Flora is dying. She knows her time is up. And the Skull Knight, who has been fighting to save humanity for a millennium, cannot save her. In fact, he knows he has to let her go. Imagine the powerlessness of that. You have a sword that can cut through dimensions. You have a horse that can gallop on air. You have swallowed the tears of the damned to forge a weapon of God-killing potential, and yet you cannot stop time from taking the only person who remembers your real face. The tragedy of the Skull Knight isn't just that he lost his kingdom. It is that he keeps losing. He is trapped in a state of perpetual loss. When Flora tells Shirka that meeting Guts and the others was destiny, the Skull Knight corrects her. He calls it causality. That distinction is crucial. Destiny implies a destination, a purpose. Causality is just a mechanism, a cold chain of cause and effect. He views the world as a machine that grinds people into dust, and he is the wrench thrown into the gears. But when he looks at Flora burning in that mansion, allowing the fire to take her so Guts and his friends can escape, you can almost feel the phantom muscles in his face trying to weep. He saves Guts and Shirka, carrying them out of the inferno, leaving Flora behind. He saves the future by sacrificing his past again. And this leads us to the most crushing realization of his role as a protagonist. In a traditional story, the hero trains, gets the weapon, fights the bad guy, and wins. But in Berserk, the Skull Knight teaches us a terrifying lesson about the nature of struggle. Sometimes your best isn't enough, and sometimes your greatest strike actually helps the enemy. We have to talk about the blast at the top of Ganishka, the world transformation. This is the moment where the Skull Knight finally plays his ace. He appears behind Femto, Griffith reborn, and swings the sword of actuation. This sword is made of beherits. It is literally forged from the concept of fate and desire. It exists to cut the god hand. It is the ultimate weapon. He swings it with everything he has. And what happens? Femto doesn't just dodge it. Femto uses it. He distorts space so that the dimension-cutting slash hits Ganishka instead, tearing open the veil between the astral world and the physical world. Pause. Breathe. Let that sink in. The Skull Knight spent 1,000 years collecting beherits, 1,000 years of eating nightmares. He waited for the perfect moment. He struck with precision, and his attack was exactly what Griffith needed to merge the worlds and create his false utopia, Falconia. The Skull Knight didn't just fail. He became the tool of the very evil he swore to destroy. This is the definition of tragic irony. It is the kind of storytelling that makes you want to throw the book across the room and then hug it because it is so painfully human. It reflects our own deepest fears that all our hard work, all our suffering, all our struggle might just be playing into the hands of a system we can't control. If Skull Knight is the protagonist, this is his low point. This is the moment the hero realizes he was the villain's pawn all along. But does he quit? Does he crumble into a pile of old bones? No. He rides on, and that is why we revere him, not because he wins, but because he endures the humiliation of absolute failure and still refuses to yield. Now, let's travel to Elfhelm. We need to discuss the encounter with Hanar, the dwarven smith. This is where the lore drops hit us like a hammer on an anvil. Hanar looks at Guts in the berserker armor and then looks at the Skull Knight and basically says, "You want me to fix this cursed thing again? Look what happened to the last guy." He confirms explicitly that the Skull Knight died in that armor. He bled out in it. The armor kept him moving until his life force was completely spent. This confirms that the Skull Knight is a cautionary tale for Guts. Guts is currently walking the exact same path. He is using the armor. He is losing his senses, his taste, his color vision, his dexterity. The Skull Knight is the end state of Guts if Guts doesn't learn to let go. This recontextualizes every interaction they have. When Skull Knight calls Guts a a struggler. It is not just a nickname. It is a plea. He is saying, struggle, but don't become me. The Skull Knight is trapped in the armor, not just physically, but metaphysically. He is a prisoner of his own vengeance. He cannot enjoy the breeze, or the taste of wine, or the touch of a lover. He is pure function. And he sees Guts, who still has Casca, who still has friends, who still has warm blood in his veins, and he is trying to guide him off the path of destruction. He tells Guts that what he wishes for, healing Casca, might not be what she wishes for. This is a profound insight from a man who likely forced his own desires onto the world and paid the price. He is trying to teach Guts that saving someone isn't just about fixing them. It is about respecting their soul. He failed to save his priestess from the eclipse. He failed to save Flora from mortality. He failed to stop Griffith. But he might, just might, be able to save Guts from becoming the next Skull Knight. This brings us to the spiral of causality. Skull Knight explains that time in Berserk isn't a circle, it's a spiral. History repeats, but not exactly. There are variations. Guts is not Geiseric. Griffith is not Void. Shirk is not Flora. These slight differences are the key. The Skull Knight is betting everything on those differences. He is betting that Guts has something he didn't have. Maybe it is the fact that Guts relies on his friends more than Geiseric did. Geiseric was an emperor, a solitary conqueror. Guts is a commander of a scrappy, dysfunctional family. Maybe that community is the variable that changes the equation. The Skull Knight is the solitary hero, and he failed. Guts is the reluctant leader of a community, and that might be his salvation. So, how does this change how we see ourselves? We are all, in some way, the Skull Knight. We all have pasts that haunt us. We all have mistakes we have made that we feel we can never fix. We all have armor we wear to protect ourselves from the world. Cynicism, anger, detachment. We put on these masks to survive the eclipses of our lives, the breakups, the deaths, the failures. And sometimes we wear the armor for so long that we forget how to take it off. We forget who we were before the war. The Skull Knight is a warning. Do not let your trauma become your identity. Do not let your struggle consume your humanity. It is noble to fight, yes. It is necessary to struggle. But if you sacrifice everything for the victory, you become a ghost in a shell, winning a war that no longer matters, because there is no you left to enjoy the peace. But there is also immense hope in his character, because even as a ghost, even as a failure, even as a tool of causality, he is still good. He is still helping. He saved Luca, a prostitute he didn't know, just because she was there. He saved Guts and Casca, not because it would defeat the God Hand, but because they were suffering. Underneath the calcium and the iron, the heart of the king still beats, with a desire to protect. It tells us that no matter how far gone we think we are, no matter how much we have lost, we can still be a force for good. We can still help the next generation avoid our mistakes. We can still stand in the dark and hold the line. The beauty of Miura's writing is that he doesn't give us easy answers. He doesn't tell us if Skull Knight will ever find peace. He doesn't tell us if Guts will win. He leaves us in the struggle. And that is where we live. We live in the space between the eclipse and the ending. We are all strugglers in the Interstice. The Skull Knight is our silent companion, the one who nods at us from the shadows and says, I know it hurts. I know it seems impossible. But keep moving. He is the embodiment of the idea that while we cannot choose our destiny, we can choose how we face it. We can choose to be consumed by the void, or we can choose to ride against it, even if we are just bones and spite? As we close this exploration, I want you to look at the Skull Knight differently the next time you open a volume of Berserk. Don't just see a cool power fantasy. See a tragedy. See a man who loved the world so much, he destroyed himself in trying to fix it. See the mirror of guts. See the mirror of yourself. And ask yourself, what is the armor you are wearing? What is a grudge you are feeding with your own life force? And is it time to put down the sword of actuation and trust that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to do it all alone? The spiral of causality is turning. The story isn't over. And as long as we keep struggling, as long as we keep feeling, there is a chance for a dawn that Berserk never saw, but that he is fighting to ensure we do. Take this insight with you. Let it sit in your chest like a beherit, not to summon demons, but to remind you of your own complexity. You are capable of great darkness, but also of enduring love. You can build empires of ambition, or you can build families of choice. The Skull Knight chose the path of the lonely king, and he paid the ultimate price. Guts is choosing the path of the human, and it is messy and painful, but it is alive. That is the choice Miura leaves us with. To be a perfect, hollow knight, or to be a broken, bleeding, beautiful human. I know which one I choose. I choose the struggle. I choose the pain of being alive over the numbness of the armor, because in the end, that pain is the proof that we are still here, that we survived our own eclipses. Thank you for walking this path with me today. It's heavy, I know, but it's the good kind of heavy, the kind that grounds you. Until next time, keep your bonfire lit, keep your sword close, and never forget that even in the deepest abyss, you are not alone. The King of Skulls rides with us.